Hi everyone, this is Gurpreet from Dataviz Canvas, and today I'm really excited to share with you all about the latest feature of Tableau, which came in Tableau version 2020.2, that is the Tableau Data Model and Relationships. This feature is actually a game changer and helps us to overcome lots of pain points which we used to have in prior versions. For this, we'll be using a beta bookshop Excel spreadsheet, which was a data set provided for beta testing by Tableau, and we'll be using that. Before any further delays, let's get started and let's jump into a basic introduction and few definitions which I would like to share before we actually get into the practical of data model and relationships. So what is data model relationship? It's basically showing us how each and individual table are related to each other. It's by creating a logical relationship between the tables where Tableau will only query the data relevant to our analysis. By that I mean is like when we are trying to create a dashboard by dragging and dropping the dimensions and measure, the query will be running at that particular moment, and the Tableau by itself will be getting the right logic and aggregating the data the way it is required. Whereas in the previous version, we used to create the joins between multiple tables and the data is extracted at that level, and the query used to run at that level. So there are lots of pain points prior to this version which are addressed in data model relationship, and it helps us to overcome all of these. As you can see, I have listed some of them, but I will just go through a couple of them quickly. So when we used to join the data set, multiple complex data set together, and you might have noticed that there were many scenarios where the data used to explode in the total quantity, total number, and we used to use LODs to fix the data. So that problem is solved in data model relationships. So we don't need to do that in most of the cases. However, there are some scenarios where we still need to join the data based on the way data is structured. Also, the another issue was with the blending. Like we had to do the blending with different data sets where we used to aggregate the data first and then blend it. Whereas with relationships, all those kind of calculations and aggregation is done with the relationship by the Tableau when we just drag the data and drag the fields and bring it into our worksheets. And also with blended data, we were not able to publish the blended data on Tableau server. Whereas with the relationship, that issue is resolved as well. So we will be able to publish the blended data sources, the relationships, which we used to do with blending before. Also with the joins, when we used to do left join or right join or inner join, we used to lose unmatched rows. But with data model relationship, that's not the case anymore. So Tableau will again automatically manage the expectation based on the analysis we are doing. So these are a couple of main pain points which are addressed in this relationship. So without any further delays, let's get onto the Tableau workbook and see how it works for us. So let's first of all connect to the data set, and in this case I'll be using the beta bookstore data set, which is an Excel spreadsheet. So let's go to the Excel spreadsheet first. So it looks something like this, where we have multiple tabs which represents each table. So we have the book data, author data, info, awards, checkouts, editions, all of these data sets. So if we want to bring the information from multiple tabs or multiple tables, in the previous version we have to do the joins, but in this case we can get all the information by using relationships. So let's see how it works. So let's connect to the data set first. Let's go to connect to data and let's connect to Excel spreadsheet, and I will go to beta bookshop Excel spreadsheet, and once it's loaded it will give us the data source window, which will look something like this. And the new feature is the new thing which you will notice here. It says that table here, and let's bring book into data source, and you will see here now we can see this icon where it says to join the link between the two tables. So what we can do here is just bring, let's bring another info tab, and let's drag it onto the data source shelf, and you will see this orange line which connects between these two tables, and it is called noodle. And when I leave that one, it will create a relationships automatically, and it will pop up a window here which will ask us if we want to manually override the relationship. So in this case, it's the book ID is the unique identifier which it automatically picked up, and it defined the relationship. But for example, if two data sources or two table doesn't have a unique identifier with the same name which Tableau picks up automatically, then you can just go here and click on each of these values and select the relevant one to create your relationships. And you can add multiple fields to create the relationship. And also, if you go to the performance option, there are a few other options which talks about cardinality and referential integrity. So by default, it's set to many, and it's this setting, and Tableau highly recommend that we should not change these settings unless we know what these cardinality and referential integrity is and how it works. So if you are unsure about it, just leave the settings as it is. And also, like, another thing is like joints in the previous version, we were able to create a joint calculation to do this relationship. But in relationships, we can't create a calculated field to define that relationship. For this relationship, the field needs to be present in those tables. So I will get onto those details in a sec. So let's say this relationship is created, and I also want to create another relationship. Let's say, so you can create multiple relationships. So in this case, let's create another relationship with awards, and I will bring it here. You will see it's by default going to books, but if I bring it here, you can connect it to the info as well. So it's up to the requirement how we want to create the relationship, but in this case, I can keep it with the books. And by default, it picked up the relationship based on the title, because that's the key with which it will join. So I will keep it as it is. And if you have noticed, the summary tab at the bottom, it basically shows only the one where we have highlighted. So in this case, we have selected award, and it's showing all the information about the award. If we select on info, it will give all the information about the info, and if we select books, it will give only the information about books. So that shows like all the data is not extracted at the same time or displayed at the same time. It's based on whatever fields we need, it will be extracted that way. So this is how the relationship looks like. But before we get into the actual workbook and start dragging and dropping the dimensions, let me show you how we can switch on to the previous view. And before that, like this view which you are seeing it here, it's basically the primary, it's basically the logical layer where the relationship is defined. And if the old version in Tableau, we used to see the joins, that was the physical layer, where join is created between two tables at row level, and it used to display all the rows. Whereas in this logical layer, the logic is developed between these tables, the relationships, and it will only give us the rows which is required for our view in the worksheets. And it is calculated, or it is all the calculation and query is done by Tableau at the back end, and it's quite intelligent in that way that it will just get the extract the information or query the information what is required in that particular view. So let's say I don't want this here, I want it to be done in a join, so I will just remove this by clicking on that, as well as information, And in order to switch to the previous version or old view, I will just click on the drop down and say open, and now you will see we will have our old view in here. So in this case I will bring info again, and once I bring it here, it will give us the join condition here, and by default it picked up the book ID and it provided the joins. And the same way, if I want to bring the awards, we can do it the same way, and we will join it again with the books and based on the title. And if I want to switch out of this physical layer, I will just click on the cross on the right hand side, and you will see this data set will have the join icon on the left hand side. That shows that we are joining a couple of tables in this particular data set, and then we can join additional values next to it. So we can do the joins as well as we can do the relationship with other tables. And as you can see here, there is an error here because Tableau is not able to recognize on what field it should do the relationship. So basically we want a book ID, and you can see here there are multiple book IDs because in the join condition, when we join multiple tables, it gave us multiple book IDs. So in this case, I will just say I want to use book ID this one, and from the additions I will use book ID this one. And here you go, the join is created perfectly. And now let's go to the sheet and see how it works. And if you see here on the left hand side, we don't have dimensions or measures as we used to have before. However, we have the table names here. So we have book table and addition table. And in the book table, we created joins for multiple tables. So in this case, there is no dimension and measures, but you will see there is a slight line here, which will differentiate the measures and dimensions. So when you drag this, you will see here there is a line. See? When I drag it over the top of that line, you will see dimension and my measures highlighted that way. So the same thing will happen in the addition. So it will list all the tables which are present in the data source, and measures and dimensions are there. And the other thing, if you notice here, there is no number of records here. So that's not because in the previous version we used to have the joins, which gives us all the rows of the records, but here, because we have the relationship and individual tables will have individual number of rows, so that's why total number of records is gone from this relationships. But if you want to achieve, you can create a number of records or count field on each of the tables, and it will appear at the measure value. And another thing which I would like to share is, like, whenever you create any calculation, it will appear under the same table. So for example, let's say we have in this case book ID, right? And we want to combine it with, let's say, author ID. So what I will do here, I will create a new field here, calculated field, and I will say book ID underscore author ID. And what I'm trying to achieve here is I will just concatenate it. So book ID, and I will concatenate that with author ID. And when I click OK, you will see that dimension is created within that table, not at the bottom. And the same way, if we create the measure, it will be created under that particular table under this section. So measure and dimensions, whenever we create it, it will sit under the same table. Hope that makes sense. And let me try to show you something. So in this case, I will go back to the data source, and I will bring author as well in a relationship. And the same thing, I have to create a relationship here. So it worked in this case, author and author ID. And let's go back to the sheet, and let's say I want to see all the authors all the authors here. So we have authors. So I will bring first name, last name, I will bring book ID, and I will bring book count here. See, you can see all of these author have these books. So if I remove the book ID, you will see we have multiple authors which doesn't have any books, but there are lots of authors which have books associated to it. And if it was a join, then we would have lost all the rows which doesn't have books associated to it. So that's the really good feature where we are not losing any records, but we can switch the way we want to. So instead of left join, if we want to do a right join, in the old version we have to create those joins. But in this case, with the relationship, we can just see the records the way we want to. So we can bring the count of books into this field, and we will say I want to see only those books which have count greater than 1, right? So I will apply that, and it removed all the authors who doesn't have any books linked to it. So that's another thing. And if I go back to the data set again, so some of you might have been thinking, like, what about unions and other things if we need to do in the relationship? That works pretty much the same way. So if we want to bring that one here, if you see here, when I bring the table on that top of that one, it do the union again on that way, and it will give us the icon like that for union. And we will get a table name field which will have addition and addition 1 for the union table. And we can do the same thing in the books as well. If I want to do the union here, I will do the same thing on that particular table and do the union. So that's quite useful in that terms, like whenever we are doing any query in the sheet level. See, after doing the union as well, the result didn't change because Tableau knows like what we are trying to achieve here and running the query only on that data set. Even we had union, it didn't change the results here. And that's pretty much it about this. So let me go back to the slides where I will quickly show another one. So this is the logical and physical layer which I was referring to. So if you see on the top one, which is blue in color, that's where our new model sits in, where we have the relationship between logical table A and logical table B. And if you see logical table A, it's comprised of that the tables in the physical layer, where we have joined the multiple tables at row levels to get the logical table. And the relationship is basically between the two logical tables rather than two physical tables. So individual tables are the physical tables, but all combined makes a logical table. And we are defining the relationship between those tables. And this is just the example which I was showing you about the model diagram, data model diagram for the books, beta data store books we have in our data set. And these are few of the differences between relationships and joins, which is quite useful. So you can go through it in your free time. But to highlight a few, like as I mentioned earlier, joins run as part of every query, whereas relationships, it's basically adjusted when we are trying to run the query to optimize the query. So the cardinality and referential integrity can be adjusted. But only the data relevant to the viz is queried when we drag or drop the dimensions and measures in the worksheet view. So query will pick up only the relevant data which is required in that particular data set. So these are pretty much, this is about relationships and difference between relationship and blends. So we can publish the relationship, whereas blend we can't publish. We have the relationship defined in the data source, whereas in blends we used to have the relationship between the primary and secondary data source, and we have to get that relationship or blend working at the aggregated level. But here it will define based on what it is working in the relationship and what is required. So it supports full outer join, whereas blends only support left joins. Related fields are fixed, whereas related fields vary by sheets and can be customized on the sheet by sheet basis. So these are quite useful features which relationship, data model relationship had come with, which overcome most of the issues which we used to face with blends and joins. And I believe this one will be quite useful for all of us. And if you guys have any questions or queries, please feel free to comment or send me an email or reply to the comment section in this tutorial. And hope you like this video. We'll catch up with you next time, and feel free to subscribe my channel if you like it, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.